It was my first night on the job, and I couldn't argue with that. I'd been looking forward to the solitude, a chance to escape the constant chatter of the ranger station. The tower loomed tall and sturdy, a silent sentinel against the backdrop of the dense, dark forest. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. I climbed the wooden stairs, feeling the excitement of a new adventure. Once inside, the room was basic, just a chair, a table with a radio, binoculars and a logbook. I sat down, letting out a sigh that was swallowed by the quiet. The radio crackled to life with a muffled message about a missing hiker. I jotted down the details, feeling a slight shiver run down my spine. It was nothing more than the chill of the night air, I told myself. I peered out the window, watching the tree line. The moon cast long shadows, playing tricks on my eyes. I'd heard the old wives' tales, talk of creatures lurking in the woods, but I didn't put much stock in them. I was a man of science, a protector of the natural world. The tower was my fortress, and I was ready to face whatever the night had in store. Then it began. A sound, faint at first, like the rustle of leaves in a breeze that hadn't touched the tower. It grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking on two legs. I stiffened in my chair, hand hovering over the radio, ready to call for backup. But before I could, I heard something that froze the blood in my veins, a voice, familiar and yet unearthly, calling out to me from the darkness. It was the way she'd say it after a long day, offering a cup of tea and a warm smile. But the eyes that stared back at me from the shadows had no warmth, only a cold, vacant stare from the sockets of a deer skull. The creature's hands, clawed and spindly, flexed and beckoned. My heart thudded in my chest, and I clutched the binoculars tightly, not believing what I saw. It was a creature of the night, a myth come to life, whispering sweet nothings with malicious intent. I knew I couldn't trust it, couldn't give in to the comforting lilt of the voice that echoed my childhood memories. With trembling hands, I keyed the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Tower 1. I've got something out here." The words barely left my mouth when the creature let out a high-pitched laugh, the sound slicing through the quiet night like a knife. I felt a coldness in the air, and the radio crackled with static before going silent. The tower, once a bastion of safety, now felt like a prison, with the creature pacing below, its eyes never leaving mine. The night enveloped the forest in an eerie silence, broken only by the faint whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Each whisper carried a promise, a secret, a threat. It was as if the very trees were speaking to me, warning me, taunting me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with their relentless chatter. I tried to shut them out, but it was like trying to hold back a tide with my bare hands. The night grew colder, and the whispers grew more insistent. It spoke of secrets, of things hidden deep in the woods that only the most devoted of watchers would ever find. It spoke of a bond between us, a kinship forged by the night and the solitude. But I knew better. I'd studied the woods, knew the tricks the mind could play in the dark. This was no kin, no friendly spirit. This was a predator, playing a game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse trapped in the open. I gripped the logbook, my eyes darting to the emergency protocol. I had to stay strong, had to keep my wits about me. The tower was my domain, and I wouldn't let some twisted figment of the night drive me from it. I took a deep breath and stood, my eyes never leaving the creatures. "You're not welcome here. Leave or face the consequences." The creature paused, its grin widening. The question hung in the air, a challenge that sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense, but I knew I had to do something. I grabbed the flare gun from the shelf and loaded it, pointing it out the window, my hand shaking with fear and determination. The creature took a step back, the smile fading. You wouldn't dare." I pulled the trigger. The flare shot out into the night, a fiery streak of red that illuminated the tree line briefly before it faded into the black. For a moment, there was silence, the creature gone. "You've made a mistake, Ranger. You've angered the forest." But as the echo of the gunshot died away, I heard it again, closer this time. The footsteps grew louder and the tower trembled. It was coming for me, and I was out of options. The creature's hands reached for the ladder, and the metal rungs groaned under its weight. I backed away, searching the room for anything I could use as a weapon. The adrenaline pumped through my veins, and my mind raced. This was it, the moment I had to stand my ground. The creature climbed, its claws scraping against the metal, the deer skull grinning in the moonlight. I grabbed the fire axe from the corner, feeling the weight of it in my hands. This was no time for fear. This was the time to fight, to survive. As the creature's head appeared in the window, I swung the axe with all my might, the blade slicing through the air with a whoosh. It hissed and retreated, the antlered skull vanishing into the darkness below. I didn't wait for it to recover. I fired off another flare, the light briefly painting the surrounding trees a brilliant red. The forest lit up, revealing a blur of movement as the creature fled, disappearing into the shadows. My heart hammered in my chest, and my breaths came in ragged gasps. I'd bought myself some time, but I knew it wasn't over. The tower was my sanctuary, but it was also my cage. I had to get out to find help. But how? The radio was dead, and I couldn't just climb down and face whatever was out there. The silence was thick and oppressive, punctuated only by the distant hoot of an owl and the thunder of my own pulse. I glanced around the room, looking for anything that could help. The emergency flare gun was my only real defense. I had 2 flares left, 2 chances to keep the creature at bay if it returned. Escape! With trembling hands, I packed my gear, strapping on my flashlight and knife. I had to make a break for it. I had to get to the ranger station and tell them what I'd seen. But first, I had to get down from the tower without becoming the creature's prey. I took a deep breath and stepped out onto the narrow catwalk, the wind whispering through the slats beneath my feet. The ladder seemed to stretch down to the ground forever, each rung feeling like a mile away. I descended slowly, my flashlight beam dancing across the trees, searching for any sign of movement. The forest was eerily still, holding its breath, watching. I didn't dare look down, focusing instead on the next step and the next until my feet finally touched solid ground. I broke into a run, the tower's shadow swallowed by the woods as I sprinted away. The branches clawed at me, the leaves crunching underfoot like the bones of the creature's prey. I didn't dare look back, didn't want to see if it was following. I just ran, my heart pounding in my ears, my breaths coming in desperate gasps. The trees thinned out, and the path grew clearer. The ranger station was in sight, a beacon of safety in the distance. I could almost taste the relief of being among people, of telling my story and being believed. But something in the corner of my eye made me stumble. The creature was back, keeping pace with me, its gait unnaturally fluid, its claws digging into the earth. I pulled out the last flare, turning to face it, my legs trembling with fear. "You can't have me! I'm not one of yours!" The creature paused, its skull tilting to the side, considering me with those dead, empty sockets. With a flick of my wrist, I fired the flare. It streaked through the air, a fiery comet that would either be my salvation or my final glimpse of the world. It struck a tree, showering us both in light. For a moment we stood there, locked in a battle of wills. Then with a snarl, the creature disappeared into the trees. I didn't wait for it to come back. I sprinted the last few hundred feet to the station, slammed the door behind me and fell to the floor, gasping for breath. The other rangers stared at me, eyes wide, but I didn't have time to explain. I had to make sure everyone was safe, had to warn them about what was out there, whispering in the night. The comms, they're all dead. It's sabotaged. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of the situation. We were cut off, alone in the wilderness with that thing prowling outside. The other rangers looked at each other, then at me, uncertainty flickering across their faces. "What are you talking about?" one of them finally asked, but the skepticism in his voice was already fading. They knew I wasn't the type to spook easily. I told them what I'd seen, the creature with my grandma's voice, the way it had taunted and tricked me from the tree line. They listened in stunned silence, then moved into action, checking their own gear, arming themselves with what little we had. We barricaded the windows and doors, setting up a perimeter of flashlights and noisemakers. We had to keep it at bay, had to stay together. The rangers looked to me for guidance, but the truth was, I was just as scared as they were. This was something none of us had prepared for, something that didn't belong in our neatly categorized world of trees and trails and lost hikers. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf outside sent a jolt of terror through me. The creature was out there, waiting, planning. We were in its domain now, and it was clear it didn't appreciate the intrusion. We had to stick together, had to stay alert. The night had just begun, and we were far from safe. The creature didn't come for us that night, but we all knew it was out there. The whispers in the woods grew fainter as the hours ticked by, but the tension in the air remained thick, a palpable force that suffocated any attempt at rest. The sun would rise soon, and with it, hopefully, some form of salvation. But until then, we were at the mercy of the dark, our eyes glued to the windows and doors, our ears straining for any sign of the creature's return. As dawn approached, we gathered around the radio, desperately trying to repair the damage. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of our isolation. Finally, a crackle, then a voice, faint and distant, came through the static. "Base Tower 1, this is Base. Do you read me?" It was a lifeline thrown into the abyss, a thread of hope we clung to with all our might. "Base, this is Tower 1. We're under attack. We need backup. Now!" The static hissed back at me, and for a moment, I thought we were still alone. Then, a reply, clearer than before. The sun's first rays pierced the treetops, sending a warm glow through the windows. The creature's whispers had ceased, retreating with the shadows. We were safe, for now. But as the light grew stronger, so did the realization that our world had changed. The forest, once a place of tranquility, had become a place of fear, and we had to decide if we could ever truly feel safe in it again. That morning, I walked into my supervisor's office, the logbook clutched in my hand. I recounted the events of the night, the creature's haunting voice, the failed radio, and the sense of isolation that had settled over us. My supervisor listened, his face a mask of concern and disbelief. But there was something in my eyes, something in the tremor of my voice that told him I wasn't spinning tall tales. When I finished, he nodded solemnly and took the book, his expression grim. "You're off the tower," he said without hesitation. "You're on desk duty until further notice." The words were a relief and a curse. I knew I'd never be able to face the night woods again, never be able to climb that ladder into the dark. But the thought of being confined to the station, with the whispers of the creature echoing in my mind, was almost as terrifying. The last 2 weeks of my employment were a blur of paperwork and quiet nods. The other rangers avoided me, their eyes full of pity or suspicion. I knew the stories they were telling themselves, trying to make sense of what had happened. I avoided the windows that looked out onto the forest, focusing instead on the mundane tasks of organizing permits and filing reports. It was a strange purgatory, waiting for the days to pass so I could leave this place behind. And then it was time. I packed up my gear, said my goodbyes, and stepped out into the early morning light. The woods were silent, as if they knew I was leaving and had nothing more to say. I drove away, the tower shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was nothing but a distant memory, a scar on the landscape of my mind. That was a year ago, but the night still haunts me. I can't shake the image of the creature's grinning skull, the way it called to me with the voice of my lost grandma. I don't tell people about it, they wouldn't understand. But every time the wind whispers through the trees or an owl hoots in the distance, I feel a cold shiver run down my spine. And I wonder, deep in the heart of the woods, if it's still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble into its grasp. Now, I live in the city, surrounded by the comforting hum of civilization. But even here, in the glow of streetlights and the company of thousands, I can't escape the feeling that I'm being watched, that the whispers of the forest have followed me, a constant reminder of the night I faced a creature that should have remained a legend, the night that changed me,